Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Rikard. As Rikard said, my name is John Leslie. I'm Senior Hansoft Coach at Hansoft. And before we get into the software and I start showing you some actual charts and graphs, dashboards, I want to first talk about some kind of high-level concepts to keep in mind when you're first getting started with Hansoft 8 and the new dashboard and business intelligence functionality. So the first point being, when we developed Hansoft 8, when we developed dashboard functionality, we thought we didn't want to just create what other tools may have, static pie charts and graphs, just kind of a snapshot in time. Like everything in Hansoft, everything is essentially real time, which allows you to make decisions and view data in essentially real-time mode, which allows you, of course, to take action upon those in real time. So the concept here is not to, when you first get a hold of a dashboarding tool, like what you have in Hansoft 8, to create this overwhelming kind of cockpit of pie charts and graphs. It's rather to really just focus in to maybe 4, 6, maybe at the most, metrics that you really want to focus on at a time. And those should be things that you can actually take action on. Things that aren't really focused on the past, but the things that are happening currently, whatever stage in the project you happen to be in, and things that you can really affect, things you can maybe work towards a goal, a metric goal that you're trying to achieve based on what it is you're measuring. The second point here, and this is also very important, is that traditionally business intelligence tools, this functionality that you now have in Hansoft 8, have always kind of been at the top level of the organization and almost viewed as a command and control tool, a way to monitor what's going on beneath the top level of the organization. And that's also been true because most of the decision making in your traditional organizations, in your traditional hierarchical command and control organizations, most of the decision making has taken place at the top of the organization, at the executive level. But of course, in an Agile organization, that decision making is really spread through all levels of the company, all levels of the organization, at the team level, at the program level, and also, of course, at the executive level. So the ability to support decisions at all levels of the organization via business intelligence tool, via dashboard tool, is super important. And that's what Hansoft is giving to all users. Every license of Hansoft has this dashboard functionality, business intelligence functionality built into it. And it's this whole concept we like to call democratizing the data, giving the ability to not only visualize the data, but slice and dice it in real time to be able to analyze problems that are seen and take action upon them at all levels of the organization. Just like everything else in Hansoft as well, there's this concept of collaboration. Everything should be collaborative, and that holds true for dashboards. So you'll see as I'm going through the tool that you have the ability to not only share dashboards that you create, but also share them in a collaborative mode, which allows you to work, maybe you're a process owner, you want to collaborate with a product owner to get this really kind of fine-tune this dashboard in a collaborative way to just what you think it should be before you share it with the team or the people who you think should see this particular dashboard, but also more importantly to be able to collaborate on it, and this brings me to my fourth point, in a more iterative way. So this whole concept of being able to iterate on features also holds true here on being able to iterate on dashboards in a collaborative way. To be able to take things and say, okay, we've got this, we have this one measure that we're looking at in this particular pie chart or graph, and we've maybe reached the goal that we were trying to achieve, or maybe we've moved to a different phase of the product or of the project, and we want to focus on something else. We want to measure something else. Maybe instead of measuring velocities for development tasks, we're now looking at a cumulative flow diagram because we've moved on to more of a bug fixing phase, for example. All right, so that being said, let me jump into the tool. And to my previous introduction to the point of everybody having access to this functionality. What we're looking at here, this demo database calls out that fact, in that we have a team level dashboard where we have, in this particular case, we're looking at 4 charts and graphs, an item view list here, things that are specific to a single Scrum team, to a single team. So this is their current burn down with the, of course, dotted line prediction based on current velocities. This is a view into their work by work remaining per Scrum team member. So we can see how equally that work is spread out amongst the various Scrum team members, and we also have it broken down by sprint in this stacked bar format here. This one is showing you the bugs that are being generated by this team by severity. And this one calls out, this is a great example of the real-time nature of this tool and also the business intelligence layer that's built on top of it. So for example, if we were seeing the severity A slice of pie here starting to grow, essentially in real time as bugs were being entered and generated by the work that this team is producing, you would obviously be concerned. You'd say, okay, where are all these severity A bugs coming from? How come they're popping up all of a sudden? And using this, the BI layer over here on the right, I could simply drag in a second dimension along with severity. And you see it draws this outer ring. And I can see that some of those bugs are coming from build 4, but the vast majority of those, based on the build ID, are coming from build 5. So it's a way for me to quickly see not only that we have a potential problem, but to drill down on it, see what's causing the problem, and therefore take action. And that's the whole idea of business intelligence and being able to slice and dice the data in real time. So if we move up one level to the program level, these would be charts and graphs, stoplights, traffic lights, things that are relevant to the team as a whole, to the program as a whole. So most of this is going to be coming out of the backlog. These are bugs that are being generated by the entire program, the entire project team as a whole. So we can see, in this case, an example of historical data where we're looking at bugs by severity over time for the entire program, not just for a single feature team or Scrum team. And here we're looking at an entire project burn down. This one is looking at a view into our release plan, estimated days per release by priority. Here's an example of a stoplight at a very high level for this program. If we want to, if we're saying here that if we have 6 or less or fewer bugs, then we're okay. Blocked items, then we're okay. If we have 14 or greater, then we want this to turn red. Anything in between, we're going to see this as yellow. So just a quick indicator to us at the program level. Do we have too many impediments currently? Do we have too many people who are currently blocked? A way to call that out. Here's an example of being able to show multiple burn downs on the same chart. So here we're looking at 4 different feature teams out of the backlog, their individual burn downs. And this one is showing available capacity versus scope by user group. And we just happen to have discipline-specific user groups here. Moving up to the portfolio level, we're now focused on the organization as a whole. So here we're able to look at multiple programs on a single dashboard page. So I see a burn down here for this large game project, and then I also see a burn down here on this same dashboard page for the small Agile project. And I could have however many burn downs as I like across multiple projects for this entire portfolio of programs and projects. And right next to this, I'm seeing an overall quality traffic light for each one of these projects, each one of these programs. And this is just based on simply a number of a certain severity of bugs. If we're 5 or under, it's going to be green. 10 or greater, it's going to be red. Everything in between is yellow. Okay, so I want to show you how easy it is to create a new chart in Hansoft. First of all, I want to get across the point that the way these dashboards are created is we call them pages, so dashboard pages. And to create a new page, you just simply click here, say create new page, call it whatever you like. And then you start out with this blank slate. And you can put as many charts, graphs, pie charts, burn downs over time, whatever you like on this page. Then you have, which I'll show you in a bit, the ability to share that out to other members of the team. Again, keeping in mind, you don't want to turn this into an overwhelming cockpit of visual noise. Instead, focus on the few metrics that you want to track that are actually actionable at whatever point in the program you're at. Okay, so to create a chart manually, you just click chart here, and I'm going to ask the simple question, how big is my current program or project? And you start here with a filter, so this is your starting data set. This is going to be what we're building, the starting data set or filter that we're going to be building this chart or graph off of. So I'm going to use large game, and since I'm interested in the overall backlog scope, the size of this particular project, I'm going to look at just the backlog view. So with this drop down, I'm able to look at either the planning view, the backlog view, or the QA view. Again, just the backlog view. And I'm not going to use a dimension at this point because I simply want to see this project I know is using estimated days. I simply want to see the overall scope, backlog scope of this particular program or project. So I drop in estimated days, and I can see here, if I mouse over, you can mouse over any bar, piece of pie, whatever the case may be, point on a graph in the Hansoft dashboard graphs, and you're going to get these nice tooltips. So I can see that the overall size of this project is 1,533 estimated days, and that's just showing me everything. If I wanted to get kind of a more complex view of this, I could simply drop in what's called a dimension. So I'll show you how that works. Say we want to see this broken out by backlog priority. So I'll just drag in the dimension of product backlog priority. And virtually any column, project column, can be used as a dimension. You also have historical data, pipelines, Kanbans, and workflows, projects, release milestones, sprints, iterations, user groups, and users that can all be used as dimensions. It's also important to note that any custom columns that you create could also potentially be used as a dimension here. So you see when I dropped in product backlog priority, it's showing me the breakdown of all those estimated ideal days now broken down by backlog priority. So when I mouse over, I can see I have 68 days worth of very high in this example, 175 days of high, 487 days of medium, so on and so forth. Give it a name. Something like that, and save it. And then here on this little drop down, you have a number of different options. Maybe you don't want to see this vertical, you want to see it horizontal. Maybe you don't like the colors, you can always change the theme. Something like that, that looks good. You can turn labels on and off to see the numbers always displayed, the values behind the graph. You have the option to clone. You also have these options to share this particular graph with people who might not have access to Hansoft. So you could save it as an image, a PNG, save it as a PDF, export it out as a spreadsheet, or simply copy it to your clipboard to paste this somewhere else. Share it that way. Now to create, there is even a simpler way to create a new chart or graph on this particular dashboard. So to do this, I can use, we have built a charting wizard, and that can be used in planning view, can be used in the backlog view. You can right-click essentially anywhere and say, create dashboard chart. So I'm going to answer the question this time. I want to be more specific. And when I want to say for that same program or project, large game, I want to ask the question, how big, what size is just the player mechanics backlog within a backlog? How big is their scope of work from a backlog perspective, from an estimated days perspective, in a visual way? So this is actually pretty cool. You can right-click any section of the hierarchy now, both in the planning view and in the backlog. And it's automatically, when you create dashboard chart, activate this wizard, it's automatically behind the scenes going to carve out just that section of the backlog or the planning view based on that level of hierarchy and everything underneath it, grabbing all of those user stories that are specific to just the player mechanics team. So behind the scenes, which I'll show you in a second, it's actually created a report to use as a filter for this particular chart. So we're going to call it player mechanics team. Scope by priority. We're going to leave it as a bar chart. We're going to switch this measure to estimated days. And we're going to switch this dimension to product backlog priority. And we want to put that on that new page we created, webinar dashboard. Say create chart. And you can see behind the scenes, it's created that for us automatically. And it's walked us through it in that nice wizard format. So here I can see right side by side, I can see, okay, well, this is the size of the entire program or project. And this is the size by priority of just that single team. So I can see just the single team has 44 estimated days scope of work in the backlog, and the project as a whole has 68. They have 46 medium priority estimated ideal days worth of work, where the overall project has 487. So those are two quick ways to create, and it's really that easy to create a new charter graph within Hansoft 8 dashboard tool. All right, so now I want to talk about how we share this. So once you've created a page, you don't share an individual charter graph. You actually share the entire page. And that's simply done by going up here and clicking on share. And you have the ability to share in a view-only mode. And then you also have the ability to share in a collaborative editing mode. So when I share out this webinar dashboard page, I can say I want it to go to individuals, or I want it to go to entire groups, as many as I like, and say OK. And then maybe I'm the say process owner for this particular program, but I want to share this out with the product owner because I want to work on this particular dashboard in a collaborative way with that product owner. So I could simply select that person, whoever it might be, say product owner Sarah, from the list here. And so now everybody will be able to view this, product owner Sarah, and also all of these people in these groups. But only product owner Sarah will be able to contribute to this dashboard page. So she'll be able to come in when she has access to it. She'll see it pop into her list of available dashboard pages up here under her dashboard tab. And she'll be able to do things like if she doesn't want to change, even though she could, this existing charter graph, she could simply clone it and make changes to this particular one and be adding to this page as a whole, whether she's changing the existing graphs or she's cloning and making new ones or she's making new ones from scratch. So she cloned this one, maybe she thinks, well, it would be good to also see this by completion status for the overall project. So instead of a dimension of product backlog priority, I'm going to remove that and I'm rather going to find status complete. Drag status completion in as a dimension, and now I can see a different view of my backlog. I can see that I have 1,220 estimated, 122 estimated ideal days not done, 262 completed, 129 in progress, and this could be of concern. I have 20 that are currently blocked. All right, so that is a kind of just a general overview of the tool. Now I want to get more specific and show you some charts and graphs that have proven to be very useful, very powerful for actual current customers, current clients who have spent some time with the tool already. So I'm going to start again at the team level. And I'm going to start with this cumulative flow bug diagram. So this is showing all of a team's, maybe a Scrum team's bugs or a feature team's bugs that are being generated cumulatively over time. So this is answering a number of questions. So the first thing that this is showing you in this particular example, I don't have a ton of data, but you can just envision this growing over time. And that's an important point to point out here, is that when you create a historical chart or graph within Hansoft, when you create a historical graph for something that hasn't already been generating historical data. So if you already have a milestone burn down for a particular date range, that's going to be fine. You can always go back and view that here in dashboards as well. Same thing holds true for sprint burn downs. If you already have those existing sprint burn downs, you're going to be able to go back in time and see them as far back as they went instantaneously. But for historical items, historical things that you might want to measure that Hansoft doesn't know anything about, it's going to start from that day forward and build over time. So the point being is, don't be concerned if you come in and create one of these historical graphs and you see only 1 day's worth of data points. Because when you come in on the second day, you're going to see 2 data points, the third day 3, and so on and so forth, and that's going to build over time. The thing is that if we were to try to predict or build historical data for every single possible combination of things that you might want to track, it would be just a massive burden on the database and a massive database size. So how we handle that is it starts building that historical data set as soon as you create that graph saying this is what I want to see historically over time. Okay, so back to this particular one, this cumulative flow bug diagram. And this is showing me all bugs from the day I created this graph by overtime, by cumulatively, by status complete, by workflow status. So what this is telling me at a glance, and this is what cumulative flow diagrams are very good at, what this is telling me is that in this particular case, in this 2-day range here, I can see that it's what is called my arrival rate. How many new bugs are coming in is much steeper, is much greater, and you can see that by the steepness of this angle here, is much greater than what's called my departure rate. And that same 2-day period, this is relatively flat. How quickly am I closing the bugs that are arriving? So when you get into a situation like this, where you have a very steep arrival rate, things coming in, and a very kind of shallow or flat, relatively flat departure rate, what you're going to see, obviously, is that everything in between, which is your work in progress, and also essentially your lead time from things coming in to being closed, in this case bugs. This can also be very useful when you're tracking how quickly you're burning through tasks or backlog items. What's going to happen here is that you can see in the beginning, the first day, we had a pretty flat arrival rate and a pretty steep departure rate. So therefore, it was a little bit narrow. We had a little bit narrower or smaller lead time, less work in progress. But as soon as this starts to ramp up, becomes steeper, a higher arrival rate, and a very flat, as you can see here, departure rate, this is going to start to grow. The work in progress in between here is going to start to grow, which is obviously not a good thing. So this is just a nice way of being able to visualize that. And the way this was built is, again, we're at the team level, so our starting filter was just looking at this team's specific bugs generated by this team. And for our dimensions, we're looking at historical data. And anytime you use historical data as a dimension, you're able to filter down to what date range you want to look at. So it could be automatic from the data. You could set a specific date range as we have here, or you could look any number of days in the past, weeks, months, quarters, or years. Our second dimension, since bugs, as you may or may not know, they use a bug workflow for the different statuses. We're using this pipelines, kanbans, and workflows as the second dimension. And if I look at the filter that's on this little icon here represents that there is a filter on this dimension. You can see that we're looking at these very specific bug workflow statuses: new, assigned, resolved, verified, and closed. So we're filtered down to just those statuses. And our dimension here is simply just number of items, because we want to see the number of new cumulative over time, the number of new closed over time, so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to move on to this second team relevant graph bar chart. So this one could come in very handy for sprint planning. So what we're looking at here is essentially the estimated day, ideal day velocity of this particular team, this progression team. So we can see by mousing over for their production sprint 1, they had a estimated days velocity of 33 days during the course of this production sprint 1. For their production sprint 2, they increased their estimated day velocity slightly up to 40 days. So this is going to be a good indicator, a good visual indicator of their velocity over time. And it's going to allow you to plan, of course, future sprints. The way this was created, very simple. We're just looking at large game, all items. We could have filtered it down to the backlog in this case if we wanted to, but since we're just looking at estimated days, we can start with all items. We are using sprints, iterations as our first dimension, and we filtered that down to just the progression team. And if you have many sprints in here, it could be difficult to find what you're looking for unless you use this little search box that we built in. So you could just say progression team, because that's all we're concerned with, and we're just going to select the 2 sprints that they've already completed. They're about to start planning for their 3rd sprint. We can see that status completion has also been filtered. We're obviously just looking at this case. We're only looking at, because we want to see how many are completed. That's giving us our estimated day velocity per sprint. And estimated days is, of course, the measure. Moving down to this next example graph. This is a way of using the dashboard business intelligence tool in Hansoft 8 to dynamically help plan for an upcoming sprint. So we can use what's called custom velocity to get a sense of, based on how much work we're committing to out of the backlog, are we or are we not, based on historic velocity, going to complete on time? And we can start to play around with those velocity numbers in a real-time way to see where we're going to end up based on how much work we commit to. A great planning tool to use, again, in real time. So what we saw up here from their first 2 sprints, they were able to complete 40 days in their last sprint. So we can probably say that they're probably going to, it was a 10 working days, 2 weeks. So that works out to 4 estimated days per day. from a velocity standpoint. And when we go here to this one and we look at historical data, we're now going to look at forecasting settings. And we have the ability to, number one, say how far do we want to look into the future to forecast. And we can also say, do we want to use the actual weighted average velocity, which we don't really have yet for this particular sprint, or do we want to use a custom velocity? And I've chosen custom velocity. And based on the 4 days per estimated days per day that we saw up here, I plugged that in as the starting point custom velocity. And you can see, yeah, we're going to end up finishing just about on time with the 40 days worth of work that we've committed. But maybe we think we can do a little better. Continuously getting better with our velocities, maybe. So we'll say, what is it going to look like if we put in 5 per day? Again, this is a very simple example. And you see here, we're going to finish a bit early. Maybe we could drag in more work into that sprint backlog for this particular sprint and see where that puts us. And maybe we can actually commit to more than we thought we could. Or if we're a little bit pessimistic, we could do the reverse and say, yeah, maybe we have a couple people out on this team over the course of the next 2 weeks. So something like that, you say, maybe we really can't even hit that 4 estimated days per day. Let's bring it down to 3 and how we track from there. And it's only looking 2 weeks into the future, and we're past that 2 weeks. So let's increase the forecasting range to 3 weeks and see where that would put us. And in that case, maybe we've overcommitted from a velocity planning standpoint to this particular sprint. All right, the way this one is created, super simple. We're just looking at, again, the large game planning view as a starting filter, historical data, and we're using here for the dimension, you have the ability to use an existing sprint burn down. So that since they're in the first day of their sprint, I just simply selected sprint burn downs here as the measure, and then I filtered that to the specific sprint burn down that I was looking at. So I was looking at progression team production sprint 3, and I selected that, just that one. All right, so those are 3 what we found to be very useful example charts, dashboard charts at the team level. I'm going to move up to the program level. This first one, when you're talking about having a healthy backlog, there's this concept that you probably heard of DEEP. So detailed appropriately, estimated, emergent, and prioritized. This particular bar chart is showing you 3 of those. So it's showing you, are we detailed appropriately? Have we estimated the backlog? And have we prioritized? So what we're looking at here is kind of a ramp down of estimated days average size. So what we of course want to see when we talk about detailed appropriately is for our very high priority user stories coming out of the backlog. Of course, those are the things that we're going to work on next. And it's important to point out here that I've used the starting filter of everything that's not completed. And I can show you what that report looks like. So I'm just saying I want to look at everything that is not completed out of the backlog as a starting filter. So we're just looking essentially at the future. And so for those very highest priority things, the things that we're going to be working on next, we obviously want that to be detailed appropriately. We want it to be granular enough that these user stories, on average, you can see we have an average estimated day for all of our very high priority stories of roughly 3.5 days. We want to make sure that they've been broken down into sub-user stories to the point where we can actually complete those in a single sprint. So that's looking pretty good from a very high priority standpoint. Our high priority, yeah, maybe those need to be broken down a little bit more. And this is looking just the way you'd expect it to look. Moving up to medium priority, those things are sitting there, they're bigger, they're chunkier. Once we get closer to working on medium priorities, you're going to want to start breaking those down into more detail, more granular, actually achievable in a single sprint. Low priority is even bigger. Very low priority, the stuff we may never get to, is really big and chunky on average. And this is also calling out, which is equally important, that we have a number of items in our backlog that haven't been prioritized at all. So this is a good way, a quick way to see how deep your current backlog is. The way this was built, again, we started with that report filter. We're looking at product backlog priority. And estimated days as the measure. And it's important, again, we're looking at average estimated days. So I selected average value here, which is giving me that average value of estimated days broken down by backlog priority. Okay, this next one at the program level, there's another concept of a healthy user story, invest. And the I in there stands for ideally would like to have independent user stories that don't have dependencies on other feature teams, don't have dependencies across backlogs within a backlog, or even within their own backlog within a backlog. So here we have a quick visual indicator of how independent versus dependent our backlog is. And in this particular example, we're looking pretty good. So we've got 87% of our backlog are independent user stories, and this is assuming that you're using the link to item in the backlog to call out relationships, to call out dependencies across user stories, across maybe different feature teams or backlogs within a backlog. So what this is looking at is essentially all user stories that are not linked to any other user stories versus how many user stories, what percentage in this case, are linked to other user stories. So we can see 87% are independent, 13% are dependent. When I mouse over, I can see the actual number of user stories. The way this was created, we're looking at single program, just the backlog view. We didn't need a dimension for this one. We have dragged in simply number of items as the measure, and we've dragged that in twice, and we've renamed those measures, which you have the ability to do, so they appear, so they make sense here on the legend. So I renamed the first one independent stories, renamed the second one dependent stories, and they're both using a different filter, a report as a filter. The first one, independent, is using this independent stories report as a filter, and the second one is using a report called dependent stories. And if I take a look at what those look like, I can quickly get to them here. So I'll look at independent stories first, right click, say edit report. And I can see that my only filter here is I want to see everything, as I said, assuming that you're using link to item to call out user story dependencies. I just want to see the ones that have, in this case, they're independent, so they would have no link to another user story. And the other report is simply the inverse of that, and excluding criteria gets you down to the 17. These are the ones that do have a link to another user story. So that's a good example of how to use filters at the measure level, to use the same measure to view different things. Okay, this third one, this is a nice way to visualize at the program level what your release plan is going to look like. So what you can see here, this is answering the question, are we evenly distributed? Do we have an even distribution of estimated days of scope from release to release? Assuming that our release periods are the same from release to release, maybe we work in 6-week releases, for example, you'd want to, assuming that your velocity is going to be roughly the same from release to release for each team, for the entire team, we want to see here that these are roughly the same size. In this case, in this example, These two are looking pretty good. They're roughly the same size from an estimated day standpoint, but this release might be a little too big. We might have tagged too many. We might be a little bit too optimistic on what we can deliver in release 3. This outer ring, this outer dimension, we can see we're using the dimension of product backlog priority, is indicating to you, it's calling out to you, of course you want to be from the beginning release to each subsequent release, you want to be working on your highest priority user stories first. And that's what this is indicating to you in a very visual way. It's saying, in this case, yeah, we look good. For release 1, we're looking on just very highs. For release 2, we're finishing up our very highs and we're moved on to the highs. And for release 3, we finished up our very highs and we're now moving into the medium priority user stories. So from a second dimension, a product backlog priority, working on our most important stuff first perspective, we're looking good. That's what this particular pie chart is showing us. And that was simply created looking at the backlog view. Releases and milestones is our first dimension. I filtered that down to just the 3 releases that I care about or want to see in that pie chart. Then I have the second dimension, creating the outer ring of product backlog priority and simply using straight estimated days as the measure. All right, finally, I'm going to move to the portfolio level and show you a quick example here. So a nice thing to look at the portfolio level may be release readiness. This is a release readiness bar chart, stacked bar chart, showing you across multiple programs now, since we're at the portfolio level, how are we looking from a release 1 standpoint across these 2 different programs. So these 2 programs, say they're on the same release cadence, on the same release roadmap, and this is showing us again at the portfolio level, from a release readiness standpoint, how ready are we? How complete are each one of these releases? So we can see they're about the same at this point in time. Program 1, release 1, has 70 points complete. Program 2, release 1, has 109 points completed. These 2 are using points, obviously, instead of estimated days to size their backlog. We can see that 426 release 1, program 1 points are in progress, 400 not done, 550 in progress here for program 2, release 1, 258 points not done. So say we wanted to look at this in a more simple way. Maybe we wanted to see this by percentage complete, percentage release ready. And we might want to look at that even side by side. So I could simply clone it. And instead of group stacked, which is showing me the actual value per completion status, per release, per program, I could say group percentage and maybe put these side by side. And now I can see the percentage complete of each one of these statuses per release, per program, right next to the actual values. So that's a quick example of the power of using the clone to get 2 different views of essentially answering the same question. All right, so we have run through about 8, I believe, very specific charts, dashboard charts and graphs that we have found to be useful, again, at existing clients. And again, this has been recorded, so if you ever need to go back and see how those are created, you'll be able to do that. But now we'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have in the remaining time.
All right, and we have gotten a few questions already, and we might start with this one. Question is, how would I see how many user stories for each backlog priority make up the average estimated days on the deep bar chart that you showed? So John, if you can maybe explain that.
Okay, good. Thanks for the question. That's a good question. Let me see if I can answer that. So if I go back to that deep example, and the question is here, okay, so I guess the way I understand the question, so we're looking at average estimated days per priority. So what if I wanted to see how many actual user stories are very high priority that make up this average? And a quick way to do that is I could simply clone this one and change my dimension. Oh, sorry, I would actually want to keep the same dimension. So we'd say product backlog priority. And instead of estimated days here, that's what I'd want to change. I'd want to look simply at number of items. And now I can see, okay, the very highs, those are 12 user stories in this very simple example that are averaging out in this chart to the 3.4. I don't have time to do it in this example, but if I wanted to see a breakdown, maybe a stacked breakdown of exactly what ranges each one of these fell into per user story, I could drop in number of items here multiple times and create report filters that are saying I want to see all user stories that are from one estimated day, ideal day to 3, another filter that would be showing from 4 to maybe 7, and then a third one that's showing from 7 up to 20, which would give me an indicator of how many at each priority level are falling into each one of those estimate size ranges, which would be an even more powerful way to break this down into detail to see where that average is coming from. And that could call out that, yeah, even though the average is exactly what you're looking for, there may be 1 or 2 outliers that are too big, still too big to fit into an individual sprint. Thanks again for the question.
All right, thank you, John. We have another question here. Do you have any good examples of how it used the traffic light chart type?
So I showed a couple very briefly, but let me cover, because it is, these traffic lights are nice, especially at the program and portfolio level. So let me show you how this specific one was created in the time we have remaining. Okay, so blocked items. How many impediments does this program currently have? Is a nice thing to see. From are we good, green? Are we in the warning zone, yellow? And are we in trouble, red? And this is simply, this one we're looking at large game, all items. We want to see everything that may be flagged as blocked. And we have, we're using status completion here as a dimension. And that's going to be filtered on, we just want to see things that are blocked. And number of items is the measure. So very straightforward. And the way you set these color boundaries of when do you show green, when do you show yellow, when do you show red, is right here in this dropdown. So you say set color bounds, and simply green. So anything that's less than or equal to 6, it's going to show green. Anything that is greater than or equal to 14, we want it to turn red. And obviously anything in between is going to show as yellow. So a great indicator, at a glance indicator as to how we're looking from an impediment standpoint across the entire program. This one here, showing you quality, overall quality based on severity of bugs. We're simply looking at dimension of severity, and we could choose this to be maybe just severity A or maybe severity A and B bugs. whatever we think is a good measure of quality, depending on what stage this particular program is at. And then again, number of items. And here we're just setting different color boundaries for number of severity A bugs. When do we want it to show green? When do we want it to show red? And everything in between is going to be yellow. Thanks again for that question. Well, we're just about. Okay, so we're pretty much out of time. Thank you again, everybody who attended. And if we haven't gotten to your questions, which we haven't gotten to quite a few, we'll be happy to answer those over the next day or so via email. Again, thanks to everyone who attended. This session will be available within the next couple of days, recorded on the website. And if you have any other questions or comments regarding dashboards, feel free to contact us at support@hansoft.com. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.